пожаловать в психологию. Меня зовут Антон. Это мой медведь. Его зовут Владимир. Вступление трошка Владимир. Ой, бред. Давай, Владимир, вставай. We touch you. Ха! Now I have to do some work. No more spending time with you, Vladimir. You sit there and don't play with Matroshka.
Казачок, уж ты песня, песенка.
So, welcome. I know many of you do not speak Russian, so I will speak English instead. I think that's probably a little bit better idea. Today, we are going to talk about psychology, and we're going to talk about behavioralism specifically. Behavioralism. What is it? Well, I went over this hat's pretty warm, I'll tell you. Anyway, I went over Freudian psychodynamic perspective. I don't think I need these gloves either. No dirty gloves on table. But I'll do what I want. Anyway, so, whoops, I gotta unfreeze this. And then I will get going. So, behavioralism. Behavioralism. Remember we left off with Freud last time, and the critique of Freud is that you cannot get any real knowledge because it's not science, it's philosophy. It's based on an idea, a hunch, and a weird idea and hunch at that. So to build science off of it is almost impossible. However, people decided they wanted to actually prove how things were going to work. Enter the next step. Pretty much, really, the next step of psychology, the reaction to Freud. Now, it's not only a reaction to Freud, but in a lot of ways it really is. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to take psychology out of this realm of philosophy, and they wanted to turn it into a science. They wanted to have observable behavior. They wanted to have a theory and have studies and to be able to observe. Okay. And so what they did is what I'm going to talk about today. There's two types of behavioralism, okay? There's classical conditioning and there's operant conditioning. The idea is we become conditioned. If I learn how to do something, I become conditioned. This is also called the learning perspective. How do we learn? Okay, that's a good question. How do we learn? Is everything learned? Is my behavior learned? Are my oddities learned? Good question, because I seem to have quite a few of them. But, so what we're going to go is we're going to look at classical conditioning. Classical conditioning and operant conditioning are very different in a lot of different ways. I will probably split this up into two lessons. I'll take a look at the time. Anyway, so behavioral perspective. The reason I have this, okay, what this is, I'm going to put a picture up there. See? The power of modern editing. Anyway, so this picture, this shows a dog. He's hooked up to a bunch of stuff, wires and tubes and things, and then there's a guy over there doing something, but what they're measuring is drool. Why does somebody want to measure dog drool? Good question. But anyway, so what they're measuring is they're measuring drool, and I'm going to explain why they're doing this. It's about behavioralism. They're trying to condition an animal to do a particular certain thing. Now, as we go on in here, I'm going to link a few videos in the description, and it's an important it's an important addition to this lesson. Normally, if we were to be in class, I would show the videos. I'd be blah 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 blah, and you guys would be all, whoa, yeah. And then I'd say, okay, we're going to watch a video, and I'd go sit over there, and you'd watch the video, and we'd talk about it. Obviously, I don't have the possibility of doing that, so I'm going to link them in there, and so this is an important part of the lesson as well, the videos. But anyway, behavioral perspective in general, not just classical conditioning or operant conditioning. Developed partially on account of Freud, partially. He didn't develop this at all, but it was a reaction to Freud, like I just said a couple minutes ago. How do we learn? It's a good question. How do we learn? Why we learn? Why do we learn some things and not others? Learning. What is it? What is learning? Now, everybody knows what learning is, right? Well, you need a definition to be able to talk about something clinically and scientifically. So the definition from learning perspective, or behavioralism, is this: the process through which experience gives a relatively permanent change in an organism's behavior and ability. A relatively permanent change, like learning to ride a bike. That's a change in your behavior and ability. You ride a bike and you can do it. Or learning to speak a foreign language. Or learning to do all kinds of different stuff. Okay? Behavioral psychologists assume that there are laws which steer how we learn. They're making an assumption. Oh, sorry, I'm blocking out poor Vlad. Sorry, Vlad. Anyway, they're making an assumption here. Okay? And the assumption, and this is important, I talked about this kind of in the introduction, but this is really, 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 really important, and you cannot emphasize this enough. The assumption from behavioralism, from learning perspective, is that when we are born as children, that we are a blank slate. That means, tabula rasa means blank slate. I think it actually means blank table, but whatever the case is. It's a blank slate. And that means we have nothing. The only thing we have are a few, instinctual behaviors such as crying and eating and pooping. So the only thing that, according to the behavioralists, think that babies are is crying, eating, pooping machines with an ability to learn. Nothing is built in. Now later, throughout psychology, we've discovered this is not necessarily the case. Sure, we learn a lot of stuff, but we do have some hardwired things, the ability to learn a language, first of all. Our brains develop in these in these critical periods, and they develop in a particular way. We've learned a lot more than this. And this is what the simplicity of behavioral perspective is one of the reasons that the perspective has fallen out of favor, really. It's better scientifically than Freud, but it's still short-sighted and it's limited by its own theoretical perspective. And this is an important thing to keep in mind when we're talking about this. But you can't understand, just like you can't understand modern psychology without first understanding the perspective of behavioralism, which kind of brings it into the world of science. And that's the main lasting contribution to it. And they still have some stuff which is true. Anyway, okay? So that's a central assumption anyway. You have to have that assumption in this perspective. So learning and evolution. Now I'm going to talk more about learning and evolution. Not like, evolution-based behavior when we do biological perspective. But this is just some of the things that are important in this idea. But it's an evolutionary trait to be able to learn. If we weren't able to learn, we wouldn't get very far. If you go and you walk over somewhere and you eat a berry that makes you sick and almost die, and then you go back and you eat the same berry and you almost die, and then the third time you eat it because you can't learn anything, you actually do die. Well, we're not going to be able to actually make a lot of babies, okay? So every species, not everyone, most more advanced species have the ability to learn. Anything that has come up on the sort of, just more complex animals all have an ability to learn. I don't know if an amoeba has an ability to learn. I kind of doubt it, but I don't know for sure. But anyway, so it must learn which events are important for its survival and its well-being. Okay. It must learn which stimuli signal that an important event is about to happen, like rumbling rocks when you're standing on a hillside. If you didn't learn that rumbling rocks meant you're about to get crushed, then, you would get crushed. The smart ones said, "You rumbling rocks, I'm going to go over here." And the dumb ones were like, until the rocks smushed them. Anyway, so if a response to stimulus produces positive or negative consequences. So you do something, there's a consequence. If I go over and I touch the hot stove, or if I say, "Hey, I wonder what it feels like if I hold this electric fence with my mouth." Well, okay. You need to learn from that. You probably don't want to do it a second time. And then Anyway, this is kind of an extra thing, but anyway, habituation is the lowered strength of a response to a stimulus that is repeated often. You don't really need to know that for this. That's kind of a overkurs, as they say in Sweden, more than you need to know. Overkurs is one. So, and this is an important thing. I think it was Lamarck that believed, I might be wrong, I think it is. I'll fix it in the vid if I'm not right. I think it was Lamarck believed that learned behavior could be transferred. Like a giraffe learned to eat up here, so kid could. That, it can't happen. That doesn't happen. Like I said, I'll check that fact. I think it's Lamarck. Anyway, classical conditioning. There's two types. Let me just check my time here. I might have to do 3 vids on this one. I think Vlad's going to want some lunch pretty soon anyway. So, Ivan Pavlov, classical conditioning. Associating one stimulus with another. Okay? Associating one stimulus with another. A stimulus causes a response that had earlier come only from a different stimulus. Okay, what am I talking about? Well, some people have heard about this before. Imagine bells and food. Okay? I'm going to get to it in a second. So this is a little cheesy joke, because the guy who kind of discovers this relationship, his name is Pavlov, a Russian guy, Ivan Pavlov. He looks a lot like me. He was maybe better dressed, but this is an expensive hat, let me tell you. And so anyway, a little comic there. I'll put it up there as well. Watch what I can make Pavlov do. As soon as I drool, he'll smile and write in his little book, ha ha ha, it's reverse classical conditioning. You'll understand that more when I actually talk about the whole thing. Okay, but here's the basic principles. All right? You have a bell. Okay? You have dog food. Okay? Sounds good, right? Oops. So, acquisition. Here are some terms that you kind of need to know. So, make a note of these however you want to. You can watch the vid a bunch of times. But these are kind of important terms. So if we were to have a quiz or something like that at some time in the future, these types of terms might come up. Okay, but anyway. Oops, there's some Swedish in there. I don't know how that ended up in there. I just left it in, I guess. But anyway, acquisition, the time during which a new response is learned. Acquisition, tiden när en respons är lärd. That's what it says. If you're curious. First, what you do is you take a neutral stimulus. What is a neutral stimulus? A neutral stimulus is a stimulus. A stimulus is any sound, whatever, a stimulus like that. You take something which the dog doesn't really have any relationship to. So dog's not going to have any sort of inbred relationship to a bell. Okay, you can ring a bell and the dog will be like, what? If he has these ears, he can put his ears up and what? Ooh, 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 ooh. Right, but he's not going to do anything else. Okay, the neutral stimulus causes no response in the beginning. This stimulus is paired with a non-neutral stimulus. You pair it with food. Food causes a response. Dogs drool. Dogs drool a lot more than human beings drool. Human beings do drool though, and if you see really good food, your mouth waters. It's part of the digestive system, but since dogs eat tons of things which are not really palatable for a human being, lots of them, and chew bones and all this kind of stuff, they need to facilitate swallowing food and digesting food more than humans do. And you know how dogs chew, it's like, and they're like, they've swallowed an entire chicken somehow when we would be choking to death. And so they've got a different digestive system. So, but they drool a lot. So when they see food, they drool. Now some dogs, they all drool, but when some dogs will drool like bulldogs and stuff, you're like, oh, go away, and they're flipping their drooly, gross things all over the house. But anyway, so the causes no response and then it's paired with a non-neutral stimulus. For instance, if one takes food, an unconditioned stimulus, it's not conditioned for dogs to drool. They just drool anyway. They need no conditioning. Naturally, instinctually, they will just drool with food, and it's involuntary behavior. They're not saying, hey, I really need to drool now because I'm going to eat. They just drool. Okay, it's like if you're running up the stairs, somebody scares you, your heartbeat goes up. And put in front of the dog will begin to salivate. This reflex is called an unconditioned response. Okay? These terms, UCR and UCS, are important terms, so you need to try to remember them. Okay? The UCR, unconditional response, happens without any prior learning. It's built-in learning. That's the important thing. Okay, so basic principles continue. The neutral stimulus, the bell, and the unconditioned stimulus, the food, are paired. And the sound and the food. So they bring some food in, and they go ding-ling-ling-ling-ling-ling-ling-ling with the food. Okay? And the dog starts to drool. He's not even thinking about the bell, but the dog starts to drool. The idea is you make an association with the bell and the food. So after a period of conditioning, the dog will salivate for the sound of the food without the food being there. Or I mean the sound of the bell without the food being there. So eventually what will happen, and you can do this with your own dog. If you have a dog, you can do it with your own dog. And it wouldn't take very long. It'd probably take a week. Not even that, probably. If you did it every single time it got food, you rang the bell, then eventually you wouldn't even need to bring the food. You could just ring the bell and the dog will start drooling. And he's not saying, I want to eat a bell. He's just making an involuntary association between the bell and the sound, between the bell and the food. At this point, the sound is called a conditioned stimulus. The sound is conditioned stimulus. So first it's a neutral stimulus, and then it's a conditioned stimulus. Okay? So it changes, because now the dog is conditioned to react to the sound. Conditioned stimulus is a stimulus that, through association with an unconditioned response, causes a response similar to the original unconditioned response. Okay? So that might sound a little bit confusing, but it's just because I'm using acronyms. So it's basically saying the bell, through association with the food, causes a response similar to the original food. So the bell causes the same response as the food did, as drooling. When the dog begins to salivate for the sound, the response is called a conditioned response. So now you have a conditioned response. You have a conditioned stimulus causing a conditioned response. You have the bell causing the drooling. Okay? That's not natural for a dog to drool for a bell, but you can condition him to do it. It's really quite fascinating. The conditioned response is a response caused by the conditioned stimulus. I just said that, really. So I'm going to put up a graphic. I'll put that one up here. 1, 2, 3. Bling. Yeah. 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 Divide. Divide. Okay, so let's take a look at it. Unconditioned response. That's the food. He's drooling. It looks like he's smoking a pipe or something. I don't know what he's doing. But anyway, he's drooling. They've got a little tube in his mouth, and there is a tube right here. And he's drooling. Then the bell, they had to have a siren, whatever. You could do anything you wanted, but okay, let's call it a siren for the sake of being funny. Conditioning, or even the light would work. Conditioning, they pair it together, and then the conditioned response, all you need is the light here, and then you have the dog drooling. And so that's that's as simple as that, really. Okay? Let's see. And, I think there's, I'm gonna just check, how many more do I got here? Okay. All right. So, a couple more slides, and then there's a video which we would have watched, and I'm just gonna link it down there. Extinction. Now, can you take that away? Yes, you can. If you don't want your dog to drool, if you think it's kind of embarrassing that every time he hears a bell somewhere, like if somebody's phone rings, he starts drooling all over the place, you can take it away easily. You just play the sound and don't give him any food. You do that 10 times, maybe. Not even that, probably. It goes really quick, because it's not normal for them to drool for a bell. It's involuntary. As soon as they don't associate the sound with the food, they'll stop drooling. So it goes really, really quick. And then there's something that's called extinction, and then there's something called spontaneous recovery after a pause. Sometimes one can get, it happens occasionally again in the future, but it's less and less and less as time goes by. So if we're going to put it on a graph, it looks something like this. They begin to salivate, salivation goes up, and that's when it's paired with the unconditioned stimulus. And then if you take it away, it just goes down. Now these are no real scientific graphs. These are just a basic general idea of kind of what happens. You know, you get the stimulus and then you don't. Okay. And so what I would do now at this time is show you the Little Albert video. And so you guys are going to watch the Little Albert video on their own. Now there's a bunch of funny stuff about Little Albert. I'm not going to say anything about it now. I'll watch the video and we'll have that discussion when we have our in-class discussions about Little Albert and so on and so forth. So that's part of the idea. So with that, that's going to be enough for the first lesson. Vladimir is hungry. Ty głodny, Vladimir. Ah, that's what he says. He's always hungry. On очень голоден. But since I have done my conditioning with Vladimir, he only likes to eat when there is some music going. So, I leave you now. And I shall feed him some lunch. Come, Vladimir, come on. Ty głodny. Don't forget to run, and you'll leave Matryoshka alone next time. Goodbye. I'll see you soon. До свидания. Пока.